Today is one of those beautifully gloomy October days, dark and moody, rainy, windy, which made me feel like going with moodier lighting and editing for this video as well. Hope you don't mind. Actually, that was just a politeness phrase. If you can't appreciate the dark beauty of this season, I don't respect your opinion. Anyway, so today I want to talk about curves. Who doesn't like curves? I mean, you can't overdo it. Usually you would expect a strong curvature in a Tachi, right? But this is technically a katana. What is a Tachi anyway? It's an earlier form of Japanese sword, although they coexisted with the katana. As I said, usually more strongly curved, and quite often the handle in particular has a very distinct curvature, sometimes quite extreme. And they were worn differently, suspended from a belt, hanging with the edge down, whereas a katana would traditionally be worn with the edge up. But as I said, it's specifically the curvature I want to talk about. It's quite obvious, and particularly if I show you at different angles. It is extremely strongly curved. If I point my hand directly at the camera, the tip of the blade is way higher than that. So what does that do? If you think that the more strongly curved, the better, it's not quite that simple. You have to take everything I'm going to say about this with a grain of salt, because this is not my type of sword, in the sense that it's not the kind of sword that I've spent the most time practicing with. And this in particular is such a strong curvature, it's quite different from what I'm generally used to. Now, I always try to be open-minded and try things out and not let bias creep in too much. But this feels weird. Keep in mind, someone who is trained with this type of sword a lot may not find that particularly noticeable, or may just be used to correcting it. But because it's so strongly curved, the tip wants to roll over like this. You know, if I just hold it relaxed in my hands, then it just flops over to the side. And this is something I very much feel during a cut as well. As I cut, it wants to twist like this. Ultimately, it's the user controlling the edge alignment. It's not the sword, right? So you have to make sure that as you connect, the edge is in line with the direction of the cut, right? Of course, with any sword, you have to do that. But it's a little extra challenging with this, I feel. I asked Sindri about it while he was doing test cutting based on his experience in Kendo, and he did not notice that. It did not feel awkward to him the way it did for me. There's your grain of salt or sack of salt. He had a different issue with it though.
I cut here, right? I cut this section. So you have basically wakizashi reach? Yeah.
Even if you're used to it, it's still something that you have to kind of fight. I could be wrong about that, but that's really how it seems. You know, just based on the dynamics of the sword, what it wants to do, it's so lopsided. So it does want to tip over, which, you know, you're going to have to correct. So someone who is used to it and is well trained will just do it automatically. Whereas some kinds of sword just don't require you to do that. You still have to control the edge alignment, but there's this element that you don't have to worry about. A very slightly curved sword doesn't do that at all. Like, no matter how much I relax the grip, it just stays there. If I relax my grip anymore, it's just gonna fall out of my hand. Now, that's also a matter of handle shape, of course, not just blade shape. Here's another caveat. The way a blade performs on tatami mats can be misleading. When doing test cuts on a ballistic gel dummy with 3D printed ribcage, it did very well, and I didn't notice any particular issues with edge alignment. And this is a major takeaway that I would like you to remember. Pros and cons of sword designs that you come up with in nerdy overanalyzing can very well be theoretically sound, but ultimately not make enough practical difference to really be noticeable, because differences in skill and even how you're feeling and performing on a given day account for more. Now, even though subjectively you didn't find it awkward the way I did, there was a noticeable difference in the performance of the cut relative to the direction. Downward cuts did not go anywhere near as well as rising cuts. He did some beautifully clean slicing uppercuts. Downward cuts didn't go all the way through. That's an interesting observation because that would make a lot of sense on horseback. I don't know how exactly a samurai would have used the Tachi on horseback. If anyone has sources for that, please let us know in the comments. But generally, if you ride past a target, assuming cavalry against infantry is a different story. But if you ride past an infantry soldier, this is quite an effective thing to do because you're not threatening your own horse. If you swing downward like that, if anything goes wrong or you overswing or something, then yeah, your horse is right there and obviously you don't want to hurt it. With a rising cut, that's also less of a problem. I mean, it is toward the horse more than the backhand, obviously, but still it goes past, right, as opposed to potentially into the horse. So that makes sense to me that a rising cut would be more effective like that from horseback, and that's what this seems to be better at. Again, based on our experience here, feel free to correct me. The reason I like the idea of an uppercut from horseback more than a downward backhand cut is that you're actually benefiting from the velocity of the horse. You know, if the horse is galloping and you're swinging in the direction that it's traveling in, then that velocity is added to the swing. Whereas if you do a backhand cut as you go forward, that's actually detracts from the force of the swing. How significant that is, how much it really does, I don't know. Either way, a longer, more strongly curved blade on horseback makes sense. So what does it do in practical terms? Essentially, you're shortening the blade. If you were to use the exact same amount of steel and make one strongly curved and the other either straight or slightly curved, then the strongly curved one is going to be shorter. So effectively you have more edge per centimeter or inch or foot or hand or Kit Kat bar or dildo, which of course is good for slicing cuts. This is where a lot of people have misconceptions. They think of slicing cuts as super powerful and something that you have to do with every sword, like you have to really make it a dedicated slice, you have to draw or pull, push, or whatever. No, not in general. There are different types of cutting actions. In practical tests, I found slices with a pull or push cut mostly disappointingly ineffective against clothing, let alone padded armor like a gambeson, with most types of blades. This is a different story. This really does slice like crazy. Such a strongly curved blade with a very sharp edge. Yes, you can absolutely just press it against the target and pull or push for a surprisingly deep, devastating cut or slice. So that's what this does remarkably well. I would argue that it's better against soft tissue, whereas a straight blade or a less strongly curved blade is better against harder targets like bone, for example, which is not to say that this cannot cut hard targets. It can. There's just a different emphasis. Now, there is a drawback, no pun intended, of this design, which is you're giving up quite a bit of reach. Not only because the curvature makes the blade, assuming the same mass, shorter, so you have less reach in that regard, but you also have to be closer to make this the most effective that it can be. Ideally, for the most effective slicing cut, you retract it a little bit and use a different kind of grip. You don't have to do that. You can use a more forward-oriented grip for more reach, right? But for the most effective slashing, drawing action, this would be a better way to go about it. What I mean is, in an exaggerated way, basically the difference between this, cutting for maximum reach. I should do it like this. And this, cutting for most effective slice. If I wanted a tip cut and use the reach as effectively as I can, it would be about here. I'm just about touching it. If I want a more effective slicing cut, I'm way further away. I should add that what it gives up at longer distances, sacrificing reach, it gains when up close, because this is quite effective when you're close. You can pull it in really tightly and basically slice or slash, whatever you want to call it, right in front of your body. And you can even put a palm against the spine and use it this way. And that's going to be a lot more effective than a less strongly curved or even straight blade. Of course, thrusts are not exactly well aligned in this case. You can thrust with curved blades, even fairly strongly curved blades. You just need to use a different technique. You can't just push forward like this. That's not going to do anything, because then it'll hit with the curvature. It'll hit with the edge rather than the tip, which potentially could still do something if you push it past someone. Basically, it might do a slicing cut rather than a thrust. But if you want to actually thrust with this, you would have to angle it. Right? It would have to basically come from the side and then push in like this. With a slightly curved blade, the tip is mostly in line with the hands, and you can just push forward like this and really drive in with the entire body. Here you can still put a decent amount of force into it, but it's different. It's more like throwing a hook almost. So if I power from the core and rotate my body into it, then I can kind of thrust like this with an offline step. That may be pretty effective. That also means that you could potentially sneak around the defense. If you step in with a cut, but then last moment you turn it into a thrust of sorts, that might actually go past the opponent's sword if they try to statically block on the outside. Not the most effective thing you can do, but it'll probably land. And any kind of injury that one swordsman can inflict on the other in a fight is good. As long as you don't expose yourself in the process, this is better than nothing. I don't know if anything like this exists in Japanese swordsmanship or if I'm just making stuff up, but I could see that potentially being used. And you can also use the curve in a bind to kind of hook with the blade, which is done with a less strongly curved katana, but this of course can do it even more so. So you can kind of hook the opponent's blade down and then come in for a cut, or even just a rising cut. So in short, this is one of those maximizer designs. It does certain things exceptionally well, better than anything else, but then there's, of course, downsides. There's certain weaknesses, other things that it doesn't do as well as a differently shaped sword. Surprise, surprise. Personally, an extremely strongly curved blade like that is not my cup of tea. I'm a coffee guy anyway, but whatever. It's interesting for sure, but not my thing. What do you think? Do you like it aesthetically? Have you used a strongly curved blade before? What do you think about it? And let me know what you think about this video. Did it draw your attention? Did you gain a slice of insight from it? I'll stop now. Thanks for watching.